Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
I was just laughing. One of those photos, Steve looks like Adam Sandler. Oh, apologies, my love. So apologies. We
Yes,
had some
yes.
important stuff to get through, but we're here. We made it.
We
Welcome.
made it. We made it. So, Jody, today we have a topic at hand. And it kind of, I guess, comes out of the last show we did with Steve.
Yeah.
And a topic that he discussed, which I thought was something that is going to be a pretty interesting issue that's going to come up in this Luigi Mangioni case, which
Mhm.
Jody, if you can you give us some background on the Luigi case?
Yeah. Um, so Luigi is, I think he was 26. Oh, I did this a week ago. um, and he is allegedly accused of unaliving the CEO of United Healthcare. Is
That's
that
right.
right?
Yes, and it's the largest insurer,
Private.
health insurer in the United States. So him doing that which makes them by default the largest uh, health insurance company by decline rate because of the fact that their volume is so high. So
The
that's
unfortunate
why I
thing is
think he targeted him.
in doing that, that whilst that might be his statement, it doesn't really change anything. Like he would have been better off putting his energy into, you know, perhaps going down the legal route and doing reforms and stuff to change laws and
Well, I think the problem with that idea, though, Jody, in his mind, is nobody pays attention, right? I
yeah.
mean, nobody was paying attention now. So when you go and kill somebody like he did in the manner that he did,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's going to bring attention to this thing. And it's been, I mean, again, I should have taken a picture of it, but if you're heading down Interstate 81 into Virginia, there's actually this whole memorial to him, Free Luigi.
Oh, they've
You know,
martyred him. That
oh
absolutely.
yeah, they've martyred him. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
and they've got all
Yep.
this stuff about healthcare and all. So, I mean, and that's just down the street from me. I mean, because people are very passionate about this issue. I mean, it's like my wife.
So this is
we,
near you, is it?
well, it's like New York's only about maybe 4 hours away from where I live. So, but I mean, it's all over the United States. This has been something that he has because again, it's something that internationally is not understood unless you're here under our healthcare system
Mhm.
and understand how diabolical it can be. For instance, my wife,
Yeah.
we just went through this week or last week. She spent the better part of a week fighting because her father has cancer, and he'd been getting this medicine that is required for him to live, and he's been getting it for the last like 2 years. And I guess now that suddenly he was, it costs like $30,000 a month. All of a sudden now his health insurance decided to um, turn him down, and he was getting some sort of grant right that was allowing for this to be paid, and essentially they decided to do a deep dive and said, oh, even though he's retired, he's making the same amount of money, his
Yep.
income hasn't changed. They decided to say, hey, he no longer qualifies, and really it's truly was just about
What
the
the
cost of
hell?
that medicine.
Yep.
So we spent like a week with her father not knowing if he was going to be able to get this medicine. So now they've been able to route it through. It's going to cost him several $1,000s now to get it. It's not going to cost him 30,000, but it's going to cost him several $1,000s a year now when he wasn't being paid anything. But they held him up and said, for a little bit, he wasn't sure if they were even going to approve this or not because they were the health insurance company. He needed this life-saving stuff. If he doesn't get it, he could pass away rather quickly.
Yeah.
And they were holding it up, and we were like a week away, and she was on the phone just burning up the phone. We were burning up the phones trying to make sure and
It's
secure, make
ridiculous,
sure that,
isn't it? You think you're insured for this sort of stuff, and
well, and he's
that's the
been,
problem.
well, that's the problem with the health
Yeah.
insurance
Yeah.
industry in this country is,
Yep.
again, it puts profits
Yeah.
over
Yep.
human life. And again, that's what that's the point. That's been a political discussion for years, and it's been a losing point. And this guy, this CEO, has made millions. He made $15 million. He's got, they made, I think, billions in profits,
Mhm.
and it's all because they deny, they delay, they depose, they meaning they take they make
Yep.
they make you go to court,
Yep.
and they do all this while somebody's sitting there, and somebody while this is happening is suffering. So the idea here, what Mangioni was trying to do here, was bring the idea of, listen, he was doing this in defense of all those people out there
Mhm.
that are sitting there waiting on an insurance company right now, or they've been declined by an insurance company, and they
Yep.
lost a loved one, or maybe they're facing, like my wife's dad was, the possibility of death because the insurance company is failing to act and has decided to do this. It's just
Yep.
like my son, little Carson. There's a medical procedure he's going to have done. It's nothing extremely major, but it's something that he has to have done. And I was on the phone with the insurance company because the doctor's office decided that the insurance company played a game where they didn't they told them that it wasn't the local version, it was this or whatever. Anyways, we start getting all these bills coming to the house, and insurance, there's no coverage. And I said, how is this possible? And turns out they said, well, we just got to reroute this. So it's a game that's played all the time,
Oh, look, we
and
get it here too, don't worry.
it's bad. It's bad, and
I've been
that's
fighting
what
for
this
4
guy. But suddenly, people like what this is doing here. When he goes to trial, best believe. Now he picked a bad state to do it in, because this would have been better if he could have broadcast his trial all over the country. And
Are they not
then
going to broadcast it?
they can't. New York doesn't allow cameras in the courtroom. It's just like the Daniel Penny case. Remember, there was no
So
cameras in the courtroom.
we're not even gonna be able to follow it.
Nope. And federally, you can't follow it. So neither
So that
trial will be able to be followed. As far as there will be reporters outside, but what's said in the courtroom will be filtered through reporters. So
Mhm.
unless people show up or YouTubers show up in mass to report on what's being said and actually say, hey,
Well, there's
this
got
is what's
potential
going
there
on.
because if he's got that much support in the community, then there may well be.
Oh,
Um,
I think there's going to be a lot of people showing up. I
yeah,
mean, because I think that it's a massive,
it's a unique case as well because the whole idea is that he's actually being charged on
yes.
state and federal levels for the
Oh,
same
and that's
offence,
extremely unique. Yes, that is extremely unique
which
in
is
the
what
sense that,
we wanted to address.
um, yeah, that it's
Mm.
it's and again, that's what we're going to talk about today, is how that's possible. Because what this brought into focus for me, even though I knew it was possible, I didn't understand what the mechanism
Now,
was that they were relying on. Because you would think that double jeopardy would
would
attach,
apply.
right,
Yep.
and would apply, but apparently not. And as Steve last 2 weeks ago brought to our
Hmm.
attention, there's something called the dual sovereign doctrine.
Hmm.
And what that basically is, and again, that's what it's there's case law. It came out in case law, actually began in 1856, was when this became recognized case law and recognized precedent. But it recognizes the fact that the United States government and the states are two separate sovereignties. They're two separate governments. And I think a
Hmm.
lot of people don't understand that. Even
Even
citizens of
though
the
it's a
United States
United States,
do
each
not think of that
entity.
as, and what this really brings into focus is that we, even though we're states and we call ourselves states, we're
Mhm.
really countries. And that's
Yep.
what this is recognizing. And we're like 50 countries that have united together,
Yep.
and we give certain functions to the central government, which has certain um, responsibilities, but then we also take care of ourselves. And what we've done is we've created a
Ah.
unified system, um, that essentially um, that essentially um, governs itself, sort of, in the idea that we are all unified and
Yep.
run as a country. But at the end of the day, we are actually two separate entities, and that's what
Yep.
this recognizes,
Well, before
and
we
that's
get
what
into
these.
too much of the nitty
Mhm,
gritty, I'll do
mhm.
a. I've got a little introduction just to give everyone an overview if they haven't heard of. Yeah. Well, if you've been living under a rock and you haven't heard of Luigi Mangioni before, let's have a look and see what we're actually talking about. And I've got it ready.
A 26-year-old Ivy League graduate emerged as a promising figure in the tech industry as a data engineer. Hailing from an affluent family, he appeared to have a bright future ahead.
He's a bit cute.
However, on December 4, 2024, Mangioni became embroiled in a shocking criminal case when he was accused of murdering Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, in a premeditated attack that sent ripples through both the corporate world and the public. The fatal incident occurred in Midtown Manhattan as Thompson was en route to an investor conference.
If you want to interrupt at any time and tell me to stop and ask a question, please let me know.
Witnesses reported hearing gunshots, and it was soon established that Mangioni allegedly shot Thompson. This brazen act raised immediate questions about Mangioni's motivations and the meticulous planning that appeared to accompany the attack. Following the shooting, Mangioni evaded law enforcement for several days, demonstrating a calculated escape strategy. His eventual apprehension at a McDonald's suggested a level of familiarity with police procedures, further complicating the narrative surrounding his actions. As investigators delved deeper into the case, they uncovered a 3-page document detailing Mangioni's intentions.
Find that anywhere.
This discovery indicated that the murder was not an impulsive act, but rather a premeditated assault, raising alarms about his psychological state. Initial speculation suggested that Mangioni may have harbored personal grievances against United Healthcare, but it was later confirmed that he was not a client of the company. This revelation challenged prevailing theories about his motivations. Additionally, authorities found fake identification documents and messages inscribed on shell casings.
Now that's weird. That is weird. The fact that he'd written messages on the shell casings.
Well, but that's the point. Is he was doing that because he wanted to make this about that. In other words, what he wrote on there was deny, depose. I can't remember the other.
The 3 Ds. I'd write them down somewhere.
But it was deny, delay, depose. That's what he wrote. And he wrote that on there, and essentially, the point was to make this again
a political
event meant to highlight the unfairness the unfairness that's in the health insurance industry and the way they do their business.
Yeah.
All
right.
Enforcing the notion that the act was methodically executed. Luigi Mangioni now faces serious legal repercussions, including charges of murder related to the fatal shooting of Brian Thompson and possession of a weapon for the illegal firearm used in the attack. As the case unfolds, other potential charges may arise. A significant aspect of this case is the principle of double jeopardy. Mangioni faces separate charges in both federal and state courts, which may not infringe upon this legal protection since they pertain to different jurisdictions.
Such a waste.
The motivations behind Mangioni's actions are under intense scrutiny, particularly concerning his apparent discontent with corporate America and the healthcare system. Family members reported noticeable changes in his behavior leading up to the incident, suggesting deeper psychological issues at play. Furthermore, the case raises critical questions about the impact of social media and modern communication on personal grievances, as well as the potential for these platforms to influence individuals' actions against corporations. This case serves as a microcosm of larger issues plaguing the healthcare industry and societal frustrations that individuals may harbor. It ignites essential discussions about how to address systemic problems without resorting to violence. The prosecution faces the challenge of navigating procedural concerns, gathering evidence effectively, and crafting a compelling case while anticipating the defense's strategies regarding potential double jeopardy arguments. As the case continues to unfold, authorities are investigating whether Mangioni acted alone or had accomplices. The focus remains on understanding his mental state at the time of the incident, with the public eagerly awaiting further updates as legal proceedings progress. The implications of this case extend beyond the courtroom, prompting broader discussions about mental health, corporate accountability, and the societal pressures that can lead to tragic outcomes.
Mm. He had just had a federal court case hearing, but I couldn't find it anywhere. Like a
Who
couple of
did?
days ago.
Mangioni, you mean?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, no, he appeared in the first place they took him to was federal court. And what they did is he appeared in federal court and they basically said we're suspending all proceedings until the state court is done.
Because he
And he's been moved to
listed it
state
the
court now.
17th was
Yeah.
his federal court date, and then
Yeah.
this, but I couldn't find anything on it at all.
Well, what they did was that was
Oh, because
literally
it's federal. Sorry.
yeah. Well, yeah. But what they did there is they suspended the proceedings
Okay.
until state. So that was just where they came in and they recognized and they solidified that he's going to be held and that they're going to proceed. But now,
I thought that was a hearing a couple of weeks ago.
what's that?
Wasn't that in that hearing a couple of weeks ago?
Well, they had the state court hearing.
Uh,
And the state court basically had to. That's where they were talking. They said that the feds that they were going to bring him over to federal court, but that the feds were going to stand down and that they were going to continue to hold him on federal bond or on the federal no bail hold, and essentially that the feds were agreeing to step aside, but of course he still needed to go over to federal court for that purpose. And then today, basically what he appeared in court on the 17th for was regarding bond, and they basically said, we're not granting bond, you're going to remain. So essentially, again, part of why the feds, and this is unprecedented because normally what happens is you have cases like gun charges, drugs, stuff like that, civil rights violations where it has to do with police officers. That's where the feds will get involved. And in this case, the avenue of entrance is because he traveled from, I think it was Georgia to New York, and decided to commit the crime. So as a result, he used interstate commerce, and then he used various different things that basically says, okay, federally he can be prosecuted because this involved him using the internet, using wires, creating the gun through the 3D printer,
well,
and all
that's
this
another
stuff.
aspect that just blows my mind. Like,
well, that's the whole premise of how the feds are going to be involved in this, because that's their theory. They're prosecuting. But one of the things that's coming into effect here is you actually have these dual governments with dual theories that they're going to be prosecuting under. So you've got the state who's prosecuting under one theory. You've got the feds, but they're all using the same investigation to try to get there. And that's where there's going to be conflict. That's where there's going to be court proceedings to say, should this be allowed? Where this is why I believe, especially with the death penalty on the table in the federal court, of saying, are we really comfortable with the federal government swooping into a state that the death penalty isn't allowed and entering this case and saying, we're going to try to impose the death penalty on this guy?
Oh, so that's what they're doing.
Yeah. They're basically making this.
Georgia is a death penalty state, but New York isn't.
No, it's federal. Federally, we have the death penalty. Like as a federal law, the death penalty is still legal. So technically speaking, if
in any state,
if the federal government gets involved,
I didn't know that.
Have the death penalty if it's a death penalty, which federally it's only recognized as something related to a death. So if you have a RICO case where there's a death involved, if you have obviously first degree situation that involves the federal government's going to prosecute, the potential penalty is the death penalty. So with them entering this case, they have entered and said, yeah, we're intending to try to impose the death penalty on this man if we can convict him in federal court. So this is going to create a true showdown of saying, if the federal government in a state where the people in this state have said, we don't want the death penalty. and
They're going to
and
impose it
then
anyway.
you've got the federal government who says, well, we're coming in, we're taking over this case, and we're going to try to impose the death penalty on this individual, even in a state where the death penalty is not allowed. So
he's actually going to have two different trials, is he? Like one
he will,
in
yeah,
Georgia
because
at
and they're
the
going to let the
state.
state court go first, and he's going to have to prove himself not guilty in both. So we're going to have another dual sovereign case, just like these cases that we're going to talk about in a little bit here, where he's going to get found guilty or not guilty in state court. And let's say he's found not guilty.
Yeah, how does
Okay,
that
then
go
you're
in
going to
federal?
really have a situation on your hand where you're going to see him found not guilty. The only way he's going to be found not guilty, more likely than not, is going to be jury nullification.
Yeah.
But what they're going to do is they're probably not going to be blatant and say he did it, find him not guilty. He had a mask on. He had he had things covering up his face. So there's enough there that they could say, is that him or not? There's already people to say that the unibrow isn't the same, and he's already saying that the manifesto was planted. So there's going to be enough out there that his defense is going to need to raise these things. At a jury, he says, you know what, we want to be an activist jury and find this guy not guilty because this individual he killed is such a distasteful person and has done so much damage to people in the way he ran his company. We're comfortable acquitting him without they're going to have to go through a second time. But remember what we learned last week, right? The first time you're going to get the full state of New York that's going to be able to come in. They're going to have full access to these jurors.
That's going to be hard picking a jury pool.
In federal, it's going to be even more interesting because remember, you have to get a death qualified jury. So they're going to be able to exclude people that would be more likely to be favorable to him because they're going to have to put people on that jury that are willing to impose the death penalty. And that's another reason why the federal government's involved, because this gives them a second bite at the apple to say, okay, the first jury pool is going to be comprised of everybody that's available. The second jury pool is going to be comprised of only people willing to impose the death penalty.
Yeah.
Which means these people will be less likely to be convinced through jury nullification that says, hey, we're going to let this guy walk free for shooting someone.
The actual weapon that he used was
a 3D weapon.
He produced it on a 3D printer. And you can actually see in the video he has to manually load it each time. Like it had issues with discharging.
Well, that was one of the things that was confusing, I think, when they were looking at the video originally, was trying to figure out, because they knew the bullet that he was shot with, but they were like, why is he doing what he's doing with the gun? And it turned out, you're right, it was a 3D rendered gun that could shoot that type of a bullet.
With a built-in silencer and everything.
Yep. Well, I mean, look, that's the world we're living in. I mean, that you're going to be able to produce these things. I mean, and this is it's just what it is at this point. And
we'll address that that exact topic in another.
Yes. So to jump into the dual sovereign information here, is the original. Hold on here. Let me make sure I'm correct on this here. I want to make sure I've got the right. Hold on.
It's a shame that, when you privatize something and there's money to be made out of it, then the public suffers, no matter what it is.
Oh,
jails. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So, Jody, where do we show screen share screen? Okay, right here. Is this going to be? Am I good to go to that if I screen share?
Yeah. Yep. You can go to wherever you want. Wherever you like.
Click on it. Oh, we got an offline person. Let me just remove that.
Want me to fix it?
Yeah, you can. We can just remove it because we'll have to put it in there.
What are you doing?
Removing the offline person. So now we just have a spot in between us.
Oh.
Yeah, Yeah, that was from when we had
Steve on.
yeah, Steve on. Yep. All right. So let me get this into full screen here.
There you go. I'll adjust her.
And turn this off here because I want to be able to show the full screen. All right, let's see
Whoa.
here. There, there we go. All right, here we are. So the first time the dual sovereignty issue came up was in 1847. I actually had the year wrong. It was 1847, and it's Fox v. Ohio, and it basically arose from it was basically regarding business activities that were challenged by Ohio's regulatory framework. So this is the case that is the basis that then Lanza, which is another case I'm going to show you,
so this is
that
the
in
case
1922 they came out with. But basically, the court evaluated the balance between the state's interest in regulation and individual business rights, and it reinforced certain powers of the state to regulate commerce for the welfare of the citizens. So this was basically recognizing that the state is its own sovereignty. In other words, that there's the federal government or the federal United States, and then there's each individual state, and it recognizes them as two different sovereign entities, meaning that the states had the right to operate itself and handle itself and pass its own laws, and that this is completely separate from the federal government, which also is its own thing. So every citizen in the United States lives in two sovereign governments. We live in the state we're living in and the federal government, and that's a very kind of confusing situation.
So you're covered under two things at the same time.
At the same exact time. So
wow.
It's a very like I said, it's a very somewhat confusing concept for people.
I'll say.
The idea here is that essentially it's an end around, and again it's controversial, but this becomes an end around double jeopardy, because essentially it's saying that double jeopardy only deals with the prosecution of the same law, which is the whole way we get to the dual sovereign doctrine, that they're saying it's not about the crime. It's not about being prosecuted for the crime. It's about being prosecuted for breaking the law, and that therefore the law that exists in the state and the law that exists in the federal government are two separate laws in two separate governments, and thereby you cannot violate double jeopardy by prosecuting someone for those same two laws, even if it is for the same offense. And that just kind of blows the mind when you start thinking of it like that, because it's like, what? And it's essentially, a prosecutor's way of getting around the double jeopardy precedent, which is supposed to not allow that. Now, let me pull up here State v. Lanza. I've got that broken down here. So basically, Lanza uses Fox, but Lanza is the first one that ever recognizes this idea of the dual sovereignty doctrine. It's where the dual sovereignty doctrine actually is put into case law. And it's where this individual was convicted of the National Prohibition Act, basically for alcohol. And he was also prosecuted for the same conduct under state law for violating the prohibition laws in the state. And they basically, the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, rules that the state did that the prosecution at the state level didn't prohibit that the prosecution at the federal level, and this is where it was recognized. And they said, because federal and state has the authority to enforce its own laws independently, and they used Fox versus Ohio and what was established in that, and that was really dealing with business. But they said that in that case, the Supreme Court recognized that the state of Ohio was its own sovereign, independent of the federal government. And as a result, they used that to say that the laws developed in each are separate laws. So thereby, you just because you're acquitted over here on this one, even if it's required same set of facts, same set of circumstances, same everything, you can still be tried again over here for breaking the law in the federal government, because technically speaking, even though it happened at the same point, on the same soil, on the same coordinate where you're at, it was still, you were governed by two separate laws. And this opened up this idea that the federal government could come in and prosecute people.
So has this ever actually been done? Like, or is this just
What's that?
have the
Has it
federals
ever been?
have they ever actually? I know you've got the example there, but like, has it ever been done like this before? Like,
Oh yes, it's happened. It happens. This happens all the time in gun. They do this with gun violations. They do this with drug laws.
we
Like
just
you can
don't
be
hear
charged
about it.
federally and state and prosecuted. That's what we're going to get. There's several other. In fact, um, so you have this case here where it was done. This is the first time it's ever done. And then we have another case. You know, and this is U.S. versus Marigold. So we're going and pull this case up. And again, we're not there's a whole bunch of cases where this is disputed, and then we'll go into the. I'm not going to go through all of them, but what I wanted to do was present a couple, and then we're going to go into the most recent one that deals with this issue. And I think Mangioni will be the most recent one eventually, because it's going to be challenged as well.
Yeah.
But this case, U.S. v. Marigold, involved a dispute over the authority of federal state governments to regulate the same conduct. It's centered on the prosecution of Marigold, who was charged with violating both federal and state laws related to the same criminal act. So the key issue was whether or not the federal government could prosecute Marigold after he'd already been prosecuted by the state for the same offense. And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the federal government and once again affirmed that federal prosecutions do not, in state prosecutions for the same conduct, is not violating double jeopardy protections, because they said, again, that they are separate sovereigns, meaning they are two separate governments, each with the authority to force their own laws. That they held in this case, and this is important, that the double jeopardy clause does not prevent successive prosecutions, thereby allowing, and the idea is that each entity created their own law.
Yep.
So, and that the law emanates out of essentially the authority of, you've got the state has their own Congress, the United States has its own Congress, and that's where the laws are made. So they ratify this law, and that is dealing with that state government. The federal government ratifies a law that's dealing with the federal government, and then they take that law, which then becomes criminal code, which now is going to be enforced.
Yep.
And because they are considered to be two separate entities, double jeopardy deals with the law, not the conduct.
Yep.
And it's now, again, there's been dissenting opinions on this, to where people, specifically Ruth Bader Ginsburg has been a huge dissenter in all of these opinions, who has said she's not comfortable with this, that this is a archaic old way of looking at things. And that
who is Ruth?
Ruth is one of the Supreme Court justices. She's considered to be one of the more liberal Supreme Court justices. She's still on there, and she's been delaying her retirement. I think she's going to eventually or at least I don't think she's retired yet, but maybe she has. Let me see. Did she retire? There might be another one that's holding out.
Are they similar criminal charges in the previous? In this Marigold, is it?
Oh no, she did die. She died already. She died in 2020. That's right. She was. I knew there was controversy surrounding her seat, but she was one of the ones throughout the years who had been a huge dissenter of this idea that you can prosecute for the same conduct, in both federal and state court, by suggesting that the laws themselves are what is tied to double jeopardy and not the conduct itself. And again, there's a tremendous amount of case law that supports that now that's come out, but that's because the Supreme Court just continues time and time again to rely on this idea of dual sovereignty, saying that hey, we've got to focus on the fact that it's the law, it's not the conduct.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So the process of his case, then, does that mean it goes to the Supreme Court before he goes to trial at state level, or so this has got to be passed by Supreme Court before it can be tried by both? Is that the gist I'm getting? No, like,
yeah, well, yeah,
yeah.
essentially the conduct. Well, yeah, I mean, what it comes down to is the because the laws are what they're saying is that it's you can have this is why you can have if somebody can be charged with 10 different like the conduct you might have one act and then you might see 10 charges come out of that act because they're saying there was this there was that and they're not saying well you can only charge one thing there were 10 laws broken by that act so there
Mm-hmm.
was maybe someone lost their life maybe there was this there was that there was all these
Mm-hmm.
different things so um is the ability here is the focusing on saying the conduct itself is not like if in state court excuses the conduct because they're found not guilty in state
The
court
feds can still.
it doesn't matter in the feds because it's
Yep.
if it was the conduct in other words it was the idea that says okay well the state's going to go take care of this and the state failed to prove its case well we're going to recognize now he can't be tried again because the
Mm-hmm.
states decided to prosecute him which is really what should be how it works I mean and the idea of the principle of double jeopardy but what they're saying is no that it's more important to recognize the dual sovereignty of the two different governments, saying
Mm-hmm.
essentially like we live in two different worlds. We live in our federal
Yeah.
world and we live in our state world, at least when it comes to violating the law.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, when you violate both laws, it's going to be. Hold on one second.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Um, so
Daddy voice.
when when you violate when you're living in those two separate worlds and essentially if you violate the federal law and it's also in the state prohibited
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to have a conversation between federal and state they say well you're living in both
Yep.
and
I was just trying to
again
work out the actual process of legality, like where it goes from here, like the process involved in getting both of those cases tried. Do they need to get approval by the state, the Supreme Court, or they've got their previous case, or they can just both can do what they like?
well what it is normally what's going to happen like what's happening in this case is one's going to step aside and let the other go and
Okay.
um like you just said, I think he said what he thinks is unusual is
Mm.
that the feds usually charge either before or after the state rather than at the same time. That's correct. You normally do not see them ever charge at the same time um, because it's a situation. That's what's unique about this is that there's pending cases at the same time. But
Mm.
my point of that is there's a reason behind it, and the reason behind it is because they wanted to make
It's a
sure.
backup plan.
Well, hold on one second. Give me one.
Carson's so cute. He's the chubbiest little bubba. He's so cute. He hasn't been very well either. He's still muted. It's there's so many things in this case that just are unique in every way. Like I know obviously there's probably lots and lots of cases out there that are now dealing with the issues of 3D guns and ghost guns and all sorts of stuff, which brings up a whole nother massive issue with regards to gun laws and gun safety and the whole um, dealing with firearms and what have you. But actually kept that separate to this particular issue. This is the legality of it, as far as the case law goes, with how they're going to address the issues with double jeopardy. But the actual firearm, although it's still an enhancement, it's bizarre because of the way that it was manufactured, and I'd really like to delve into the potential issues that we're going to see now, because if anyone can just make their own firearms, then it's going to lead to issues with getting into the wrong hands. What happens if it's not made properly and it backfires and we have injuries, and just the whole concept of it is going to bring up a whole nother set of issues. So we'll deal with that in another. We're back.
Oh yes.
Is Connor better?
He is. Oh, he's feeling a lot better now. Unfortunately, Carson, he's still got a very bad cough, but he's on the mend as well. But he got sick later. He was like the second. He finally got. Unfortunately, they diagnosed him with RSV, and we got an official diagnosis on him, and we had to,
is that a health department?
Start treating him with breathing treatments and stuff like that. But he started to finally get well and start to kind of head on the other side of this thing. So, but yeah. So I think where we were at, we were talking about the idea here, but between,
I just wanted to know how it played out, basically.
It played out, yes. And in this case, like I said, I think the strategy behind this was more related to bond, because essentially he's now going to be held for certain with no bond because it's a death penalty case in the federal case, and federally you're not going to get bond on a death penalty case. So by them keeping that over his head and keeping him there, it makes sure that in state court, bond could be set and he has resources that he could get released. Now, all of this will play out, all of this will come out, and this will be something there's going to be interplay between these two entities, because his attorneys are going to be focusing on the fact that, again, the feds have a separate idea of what the theory of the case was, than the state. So that's one of the issues that they're going to bring up. Also, on top of that, because they're holding him federally, they're going to be holding the federal government's feet to the fire, in the sense that they're going to be saying, listen, if you're going to hold him, you need to make a showing of proof, and they're going to probably try to, I think, try to make the state accountable for, or not the state, but the federal government accountable for whether or not, hey, are you going to actually push forward with the death penalty in this case? And if you're not, then let's have a hearing on whether or not this should be going forward, and should he be required to be held with no bond. But it creates two mountains, because even if he's granted bond in state court, he's got to go to federal court, and vice versa. If they set bond in federal court, state could hold him with no bond, and it keeps him in jail, lets him from walking out.
So the state at Georgia,
the state of Georgia is not in this at all.
Oh, so state of New York, and then federal.
State of New York, and I mean, everything is being handled in New York. The federal case is in New York. That's where the crime happened. But what they're saying is, if you use interstate commerce in perpetration of a crime, so if you travel to another state, then technically speaking, you are now within federal jurisdiction to be charged if you can show that travel was an element or a part of the crime. And because he traveled from state to state and then was using various resources and things to try to figure out, like he used the internet, he may have reached out to people, whatever that they have, and they have this manifesto which they claim bolsters this. But if you used the interstate to in commission of the crime or furtherance of your
Mm.
crime or in support of your crime, you will now fall under federal jurisdiction.
So could this
Which is what they're doing.
potentially affect Coburger?
No, I don't think so. No, there's really nothing to do with this. Would have no effect on Kohlberger at all. Kohlberger might have some death penalty implications in terms of it being a death penalty case. So
But didn't he
obviously,
travel from state to commit allegedly? No.
I don't believe so. I think it was all in the state of Idaho, wasn't it? I don't know. I be honest with
Oh,
you on that case. I have
yeah,
not been following that as astutely as others have. So I
yeah.
am
I
not
watched it
certain. I know
initially.
he traveled from a different town. I didn't think it
Yeah.
was a different state.
Okay.
But in this case, I think it's more along the lines of him using a laser printer to create the gun, and he did different
Oh,
things that were.
well then,
You know,
if you use the internet for a crime, then they can take jurisdiction. Is that so? That could pretty much be you do a Google search, and that applies to
right.
everybody. Then, yeah,
Well, yeah, in theory, yeah.
technically.
If you well, listen, there's a book out that came out probably 15 years ago, and it
Mm-hmm.
was talking about how the federal government has criminalized everything, and many people commit. They say that the average citizen commits about 20 crimes a day and has no
I
idea.
don't
It's
know
like the whole idea of conspiracy, right? So
what's the book name.
conspiracy. I have it in my garage. I cannot remember the name, but it was something to do with like the federal or the federal overreach or something to that
I'll
degree. I have to
Google
look
it
it up and see if I can
while
find
you're
it.
doing it. Yeah.
But it's basically it was the idea that they had basically started criminalizing all this stuff, and that if you look at the federal statutes, coupled with the state statutes in every state, that pretty much when you go out, that they said in that book, the idea was that the average citizen commits about 20 crimes a day. One of the biggest examples of that is like, for instance, a lot of people don't realize that the idea of conspiracy to commit, right, doesn't involve committing any act at all. Conspiracy to commit something could be you and I that says, hey, we're going to go to the store and we're going to go steal some Coke cans. So you go, you know what, Steve, I'm going to go, we talk about it, and you go on the internet and Google what time does Walmart close and
Mm-hmm.
what's the lighting in the back of Walmart's parking lot. By you and I agreeing to do this together and you Googling that, we have just committed the crime of conspiracy to go rob Walmart. And the way we get there is there's got to be one act in furtherance of that conspiracy. You Googling it would have done that. Now, potentially, if this would have been by you going and Googling it and us utilizing the internet, we've used the wires. So therefore, we could potentially involve the federal government in this case. We could have the state government involved in this case in the conspiracy because we used it in a conspiracy to act. So it could now become a federal case and a state case. And again, as with everything, like I used to tell my employees, especially when I say, hey, I think I'm right. I'm always, I'm the perfect employee. Yeah. Okay. Give me about an hour to watch you. And I guarantee you, I can come back with about 10 ways that you're probably not in compliance with the company policy, because there's so many ways you don't even realize. You think so, but it changed 2 weeks ago. It changed a month ago. And there's different
Unchecked,
things you're doing that,
unchecked federal power.
well, I mean, that's why we continue to expand the authority of prosecutors, and that's one of the concerns that a lot of people have. And in this case, we're seeing it now,
Okay.
and it's unfortunately that it always comes under the idea that, hey, I'm not doing anything wrong, and it's like, yeah, well, give me a minute and I'll show you. And that's the problem. And when
I've
somebody
just
says,
brought up
yeah,
a list of the top 10 things that if unchecked, the growth of federal power without a countervailing state power that will restrict individual liberty and threatens tyranny. For example, here we go. Dictating a school curriculum, testing lunch menus, and transgender use of bathrooms and locker rooms. Prohibit mining and burning of coal. Regulate ditches and canals as water of the US. Revoke accreditation of colleges whose standards are not politically correct. Force private religious employers to provide contraceptive services, dictate overtime pay, far out. So
Well, I
they
think I
can
think
do.
well, I think the idea here though is and again, not delving too deep into politics here
Mm,
because those are kind of politically charged issues, but the idea here is always should be, and this is, and we couch it in terms of like the federal government as a threat. The federal government isn't really a threat, as long as the people say this is what we want the Fed, because the federal government's role should be to take care of things that are too big for the individual
mm,
state to take care of. It's too big for the individual to take care of. So the federal government comes in. For instance, something like healthcare. There has to be a federal solution to some of these things because
mm-hmm.
it says, okay, so if we believe health, happiness, or if we believe is something that should be part of our of our right as a citizen, then we decide, okay, well, where do we go? How far do we go
Yeah.
in dealing with
Where's the
that? And
line?
when you let private, the problem is when you let something be an all private solution,
Yep.
you're going to be subject to profits. Well, profits will
Uh-huh.
just destroy something if it goes unchecked. So you can't let
Yep.
that be unlimited either. There has to be a limit. So the
So
problem
they're
that you
saying
have,
that the states are there to oversee, that the federal
well,
government
the
don't.
dual sovereignty says that the state, there's two, we have to, whenever we're looking at something,
Mm,
whether it's breaking the law or looking at it from um, a political side, that we
mm,
have to recognize that the state has its own role and has its own right to regulate itself and has its
yep.
own ability to be there. But the problem with the dual sovereignty is it says, okay, they operate in two different ways. So it's like if you take the dual sovereignty out, right? And you
Mm,
say, okay, make this make sense. So we're going to say, okay, for purposes of prosecuting someone, we can have two prosecutions because there's two laws.
mm.
Well, then by default, shouldn't there be a federal schooling and state schools? Because we're living in two different
Yeah.
governments.
Yep.
We would not say that. We would say that's a conflict. So
Yep.
we would say you have to settle on one or the other. Who's going to get to overrule in this situation? And what should happen in these situations is, yes, we say, okay, the state prosecutor sits down and the federal prosecutor sits down,
Yeah.
and one
And they
says
agree
who's
on.
better equipped to take this case on
Yeah.
and who's going to do it, and then they go do it. And you don't have federal schools and state schools, but out of the dual sovereigns, you could potentially have that develop if they've said, you know what, listen, a solution would be, instead of having the federal government come in, because
Mm,
we live in the United States and we live in the state of
yep.
whatever you live in. Well, let's have true fair competition and say, okay, we're going to have federally funded schools and we're going to have state funded. But then the problem becomes, well, the same person's funding that. So the citizen but the federally funded schools would come out of a pool of money that would be paid for out of a
Yep.
federal levy, whereas the state schools would be only out of the state of such and such. So probably, again, who would win? Well, states that are really rich might have better schools to offer
Yep.
than the poor state who might say their citizens really like the federal schools. Is that a way to deal with this stuff where you say let's have true competition between the two sides? If you're going to look at healthcare, same thing. Should it be, instead of saying we have private or public,
Yep.
would it not be better to have a dual sovereign solution where you say we're going to have a federal solution and a state solution, taking this idea of dual sovereignty out
Mm,
of, and saying, I mean, we've already recognized it in one of the
yep.
probably most important uh, arenas, and that is the arena for us, for where we're allowing, and again, a lot of people don't think of it like this, but anytime you're dealing with the court system, you're actually dealing with the ability of the state to take possession of a human being. And
Mm,
you're allowing the state to take them into custody. Custody means they own you. It means that they're stripping you away of your rights, and you are now a piece of property of the
yep.
state.
Yep.
And that's why they take you in, and that's why they have state prisons
Mm-hmm.
where they're running, the license plates are being created and whatever. And that's why they say this is literally state sanctioned slavery,
Yep.
because they can go in and say, okay, we're going to pay you $1 because you're a prisoner and you get $1 in your commissary account. But the rest, the real labor in that might have cost 18 or 19
Mm,
bucks. The state is realizing that in the idea that this prisoner, but the prisoner gets very little credit for it. So That's why it's a controversial issue, but of course, it's always couched in the idea, well, these guys are felons and these are whatever. But it's
But
really serious because it says when you look at it and you look at it only upon the most serious crimes, like what we see on Law and Crime, what we see when we're looking at these cases that everybody's following on YouTube,
mm,
those are the most serious. That's like those are not the normal typical. You go into a community and you go to the
yeah,
criminal justice court building down there and you go watch the cases, you're not going to see
no,
unaliving cases as a primary case.
yeah,
You're going to see DUIs, drunken
yeah,
publics. You're going to see maybe some shoplifting
TVs,
charges. You're going to see
yeah,
domestic violence
yeah.
incidences. You're going to see like a fight at a bar, and those are going to be all the things. You're going to see the stiffness of the laws, mainly drug offenses, people that were pulled over and they searched their vehicle. You're going to see all of that going on, and what you're going to be seeing is the state taking possession of these people, and in some cases, again, it's a question of resources, and that's what these cases don't take into
Well,
account. It's
that's
the
what I'm
fairness.
thinking. Like, what it seems to me like it's a waste of resources because you're doing things twice when you don't really need to. I mean, if he gets
Well,
found
what it
guilty of
is,
what,
it is a waste of resources at one level, but also think about the person we're not thinking about here is the individual that's presumed innocent and the individual that doesn't qualify. We have a criminal justice system that says, okay, you have to either be dirt broke and poor, basically making less than $12,000 a year in order to qualify for the services of a public defender, or or you're rich and you can hire the best attorneys, or
yeah,
in the in between, you will be limited by whatever your resources are to get a loan, which who's going to give you a loan if you're charged criminally? Uh, Accessing equity in your house, again, who's going to give you an equity loan,
yeah,
although they might give you, you might be able to, or whatever you might have in your savings account. So say somebody goes into their retirement account and gets 20 grand out because they get arrested for DUI or they get
mm,
arrested for a drug charge. Now what happens is now you're going to get, that person's going to get bled, right? They might defend themselves successfully, say in the state court, and then the feds come in and say, we're going to charge you for the same offense. Now you've got to fund a separate defense,
yep,
and they're bleeding to defend it,
yep,
leading out the right, and the defendant doesn't have a right to adequate counsel at this point. And that's the question here is like this person's got to defend twice now on this charge, which double jeopardy was directly created to prevent that. And we have
mm,
this idea, double jeopardy, presumption of innocence. These are the things that are supposed to be the balancing factors against the state who has all of these unlimited resources. What the state's effectively doing, and what this dual sovereign doctrine essentially does,
mhm,
is it's eliminating that. So it's eliminating that as a benefit to the defendant, which means now you literally have this huge inequity that's developed to where you have this fully funded, fully throated state or federal, you know, entity that's
mm,
going that says we want to take you into custody and we want to take possession of you for violating this crime. And it really isn't about breaking the law anymore. It's about, do they pay attention to you? So if you get their attention, either you become somebody who they don't like because you're causing problems in social media, or you're somebody who is just, maybe you stumble into them and again, and they start looking at you. Once they turn their investigative forces to you, it's just a matter of identifying what you've violated and and what they want to go after and what's the most serious or how far they want to go and to go with you. And
mm,
then once they do that, now they're going to drain you of all your resources. Everything you've worked for in your life is going to go out the door because you're going to have to use it to defend against it. And that's not even going to be enough anymore, because then they're going to bleed you dry. They're going to
yeah.
take you to state court. They're going to take you to federal court. That's why they say these celebrities and people of influence, how do they go after their influence? They just go start,
Money.
they start
So at
funding
the
civil suits against them, which then turns into criminal cases, which just bleeds them dry of
yeah,
all of their wealth. And then they're no longer powerful anymore, or whatever it is that their real problem is. They come to them and say, either now you're going to do what we want, or we can keep this up because we have unlimited resources, because we're the federal government, we're the state government,
yeah.
and we can just continue to go after you. And we're going to continue to put that microscope and that spotlight on your life. And we're going to continue to just take you apart.
Well, because my concern is like the at the end of the day, the worst, the the worst outcome is life without parole,
Right.
which is looking at anyway at a state level. So what more can they do by retrying that? When yes, they might be able to add the death penalty on top of that, but at the end of the day, that's still they're not going to get any further than that. Do you know what I mean? Like I don't see the point
Well,
logically in my head.
the point the
2
point
life
and the
sentences is
logic
like
is not in it's not in the point and the logic is in the idea here again of, like I said, it's about the bond issue. It's about holding him without bond. It's about making sure that if he does somehow get jury nullification in one case, that the next case they're gonna bleed
it's a
him
backup
dry
plan.
of finances, and they're gonna listen. They're gonna force his family into financial submission because right now they've got all this money. Well, believe you me, these attorneys are not coming cheap, and they're not going to go, well, we're just going to do this for $50,000. They're going to tell them we're fighting two fronts: feds, state. We're going to need all this stuff, all these experts, all these resources, and they're going to bleed his family financially dry, and that's what they're going to be able to do because they're going to say, and over here you're fighting for literally your life. Over here you're fighting for the rest of your life. So you're going to have two funded defenses, and everything this family makes. Or guess what? His family says, you know what? We're done. We're tapping out. Luigi, you did this on your own, and we're not expending any more family wealth towards this. Now, if that happens, now he's going to have to get appointed counsel. Now he's going to almost probably assuredly be convicted. And then they silence this guy who has opened up a movement that these government officials don't want.
I thought there was talk of the community funding his defense. I thought they'd raised
Well, they had
a
raised
lot of
some
money.
funds on it. Absolutely, they had. Yes.
Yep.
Well, I mean, but the point is that again, how they're going to try to exhaust as much as they can out of as far as resources wise. Yes, I do believe that there was some community funding of it, but the point is believe you me, whatever they've raised now, again, I think part of it, the reason why they have him up in New York and they have him in MDC and they've limited his ability is to try to stymie that community funding, to try to not give him the voice that he would have if he was able to get access to the media. And by keeping him in MDC as opposed to over at Rikers Island, they have more control over who he talks to, who he speaks with, and what gets in and out, because they're going to have full control over there at that center because it's a federal detention center, and they have more ability to control what he's going to do or what his ability is as far as getting people upset and getting people rabble roused to come out in his support. But the point is, they're going to try, that's the goal here, is to try to bleed him dry of resources so that then they get him right where they had Ty Tucker.
He can't defend
and they
himself.
get him to plead out, and then he goes away. And that's the whole point right now, again, of saying, do you really want to take this to trial, Luigi? Because if you go down the trial, maybe you win in state court, but we're going to try to take your life in federal court. So now, remember, when they start negotiating, because a lot of times in these cases, especially with the feds and state coming together, if there's a plea bargain at any point, it would be then worked out between state and federal to then say, okay, here's the deal. We're going to work out a plea deal that's going to involve taking care of both of those charges. You also have to understand, too, that federally, by the feds being involved, they can take him out. And again, what do they want to do? They want to shut this guy up. They do not want the backlash and the publicity that comes with a guy like this guy who's trying to make a social issue out of this. So he would qualify to go to the Supermax facility, where it's underground. Supermax is one of the worst prisons you could possibly be in. It's underground. It's out. I think there's two of them or three of them, but the one that's always talked about is out in Colorado, and it's built into a mountain, and it's underneath the ground, and you are locked up 24 hours a day, and you have no access to outside people. You have no ability to do interviews. You're completely restricted, and like they're taken out of their cages one time a day, and they're allowed to walk in a little cage, and then they're brought back in. And anytime they're out, they're completely. It's absolutely.
This is a federal prison, is it?
Oh no, it's a federal prison, and it's solitary confinement. You don't have a fellow person in there with you, and it is the most hardest way to do time because a lot of people think, oh, the violence and everything. No, the hardest thing about doing time is
The isolation.
just go isolation,
Mhm.
sit in a box for the rest of
Oh,
your life.
yeah. Oh,
You
yeah.
know, there's nothing else coming. You know, there's
Mhm.
nothing else happening. You know, there's nobody ever. You know, and then when they go do a visitation, um, it's done through video. Um, so
Far out. So not even person to person.
nope, nope, never. It's bad news. So, but he would qualify for all of that, and all of that would be again that they can come and say we can really make this guy's life miserable. He has no idea what's coming. Remember, I don't think Luigi Mangioni really
Thought
was
this through.
thinking clearly
No.
when he did this. I mean, I don't think there's any way anybody's going to say, yeah, I think this guy was of sound mind because he did
How
this,
does that play into this then?
well,
Hmm.
I mean, that's something his defense will have to consider, as far as when they're defending the case,
Mhm.
and what they decide to, how they decide to approach this thing. Like I said, the overriding belief right now is that he's going to make this into a social issue and a social cause, and that he's going to um, say, listen, make this a statement against the healthcare industry and acquit me. And this guy was um, one of the worst, represented one of the worst companies, um, in the United States as far as um, healthcare was concerned, and they have the highest
Mhm.
amount of denials, et cetera, et cetera. But we'll see. Now, the final case we're going to talk about in this is the most recent case, which I think you're going to see the Mangioni case that will fall in here and will get challenged again. But the Supreme Court, as you can see, the makeup of the Supreme Court is extremely favorable to this dual sovereignty idea. And it involved Terrence Gamble. It was a firearm charge out
That's
in,
the case that Steve, yeah.
yes, this is the
Yep.
one.
Mhm.
And it was a 7-2 favor. And one of the dissenting individuals was, as I said, was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was one of the two, and I believe the other one, I can't remember the other one, but it's basically are both liberal judges that are still existed on the Supreme Court at the time. But they reaffirmed the principle again. The argument here was that this is outdated law, this is an outdated interpretation of the law, and that this is ridiculous in that there's no way this was the conception that the founding fathers would have had, that you would have somebody having to be tried twice because you recognize that the federal government and the state government are each creating a law, that someone has to stand down and let the prosecution go, and then that double jeopardy attaches to all further
Yep.
prosecutions for that act. And again, um, the um, the Supreme Court went back and said all the other cases, all that there was that the historical precedents that have been set over the years, they said they were relying on that and said that this is a foundational, that this dual sovereignty doctrine has a foundation in American jurisprudence, that it's in the foundations of our legal system, and that therefore we have to recognize this. And the idea here is that this isn't going away. So
Yep.
once they did this, now from the dissenting justices, they argued their argument was that, which is in my opinion correct, that it violates double jeopardy and leads to unfair treatment of defendants. So to me, I think it's a statement on the Supreme Court and who's sitting in the Supreme Court, and this is just where we're at. I mean, there's really not much we can do because this is the mentality that they have, and until we decide to not make the Supreme Court a lifetime appointment, which is something that is an issue, we're going to be dealing with this for a long time.
Mhm.
Absolutely, Dale. I agree. I think jury
So you
nullification
think
should
that's
be
the
a
best
strategy.
defense
Yeah,
strategy that he's got?
I think so because I don't think that. Remember, when we've dealt with this in a couple cases early last year, the Chloe Driver case. which was a diminished capacity case. There was another one that was diminished. It's very difficult to prove, nor does this guy want to sit in a state prison hospital for the rest of his life. Because remember, even if you're found not guilty by reason of insanity, even if you can, reach that level and prove what you need to prove in court to get that, it is not a free pass. You do not walk out of court, even though the prosecutors might want the jury to think that way, so they are less apt to go that route. But you're going to a state prison hospital where you're going to be sitting among the craziest of prisoners in conditions that are not much better than federal or than state prison. And you're going to be sitting there among these crazy people. Now, in the event, that would be a very now, I would love from this dual sovereign perspective that if they raised an insanity defense and the state court finds he's insane, would that create the president to say, wait a minute, a jury already found this guy's insane. Does that prohibit the feds from going forward? Because that, I mean,
not competent.
Well, that creates a whole thing, and that could be an entrance way to challenge this whole dual sovereignty and make it be something that has to be reconsidered, and maybe set the president in case law into effect. That might be a way to start undoing this as being recognized as this doctrine that must be followed. Because to me, I think it's just the simple thought process of like, okay, if we're going to recognize this, how does this apply to other aspects?
Yeah.
In terms of like, if we're going to say that one steps aside for the other, shouldn't we have to say the same thing is in this?
I printed out a heap of questions and I've put them somewhere. So give me 2 seconds and I will come back. I'll go and find them.
All right. But yeah, well, I think you're correct on that. I think that's why the feds are in there, because the federal case does create entirely different issues from the standpoint of that, the death penalty is on the table here with this, and but I believe if a plea deal was worked out, he's not doing an open plea in this case because he's going to take a plea deal that's going to resolve both sides. I think that's the only way this will work. And that's why the feds kind of, in a way, you could make an argument that they kind of, I think my opinion is one of the reasons why you didn't see the federal government wait in this case is because they wanted to be there as a threat to force him into a plea deal by saying your life is literally on the line, in hopes that they would say, okay, listen, this becomes part of the negotiation, as opposed to him thinking to himself, oh, we're just dealing with the state charges and I don't want to spend the rest of my life in prison. I'm willing to fight this thing, to the nth degree, and thinking that, hey, you know what, there's no death penalty, there's no threat to his own life. However, now that the feds are involved, that threat exists now to his life. And I think that's the play here and why they decided to do that. Let me see, what is the correct? There we are. So I think that's the thing. But I think jury nullification, I think I agree with Dale's perspective on this, that jury nullification would absolutely be the best route for him in this case, because I think it's going to be, listen, I think that it's something that a lot of people can relate to as far as dealing with the healthcare industry, dealing with their standards, dealing with getting things turned out. And again, it's something that continues to deteriorate year after year, at least in my opinion, as you see your healthcare plans come out from employers and you see the coverage and the deductibles raising and rising. I know when I went to the urgent care because our primary care doctor wasn't available to see my 4-month-old, 4.5-month-old. So we had to go to the urgent care. We go to the urgent care, right? If we'd gone to our primary, it would have been, I think, a $30 copay. That would have been reasonable. Because we went to the urgent care because they didn't have any appointments, but we needed him to be seen, it was now $50 copay. So that resonates with people. $50 is a lot of money when you're thinking about the days of a $20 copay or a $10 copay, or it was 10 or 15 or 10 and 20. And now you're talking about 30 or 50. That's crazy. And that's and for some people that's a tremendous amount of money, and you're basically putting the inability, if somebody walked in and they wanted it up front. So if somebody walks into that urgent care and they don't have $50, guess what? They're going to the ER where they have to be seen. So and then that creates a whole nother set of issues, potentially, depending on things. Although if you have insurance, you're going to get charged a big fee at the ER too. So I don't know. I don't know what, again, in this situation, it's like, where does the solution lie? And the problem is, the solution lies in regulating these guys, but this is where Mangioni comes in with what he's done here, is bringing this conversation to the forefront and uniting people around his cause when he says, I did this to bring attention to this. And there are so many people this is going to resonate with that are going to be looking at this and saying, you know what, this guy didn't do this because he's some bad guy. He did this because he killed the worst guy. That the person he killed was killing people every day with his policies, with his declines, with his delays, with his willingness to make a profit off of people's medical problems.
Yep. I've got a similar thing over here. We've got it's not private. Well, we do have public and private health insurance, but we have what for disability, say, okay, which is what I come under. So generally they had state funding and then federal funding to help people with disabilities in the community. And then the government decided that they wanted to have a unified one place where everyone is covered under federally. And they made this what's called the National Disability Insurance Agency. Now you add insurance into that name. And you add then, a absolutely strict set of criteria, which is fine. Now, we also, to claim disability income, you have to then meet the federal standard or the state standards, which, in my eyes, once you've proven that you can do so, and then you've established that it's a lifetime issue, then that should automatically make you eligible to access services that you need and supports. Yeah. No. They approach it completely differently. No. So I've actually been fighting 4 years. It's taken me, and I'm still no closer. And what they do over here, they've created this. It is the most ridiculous business module. Okay, so you apply to access their funds. The people that take your form, the intake people, have no training, no experience, no knowledge of any medical issues. They have 3 tick sheets with lists of your medical conditions on them. So list A, if your medical condition hits list A, you actually get accepted. B, no, they want more information. C, definitely not. And they just boot you from there. So if your condition isn't that common, but it is still debilitating, they won't. You have to then go through a further investigation, right? That's fine. Now, what they've done, if you get accepted into this, you have 2 choices. You can either manage your funds yourself, or you can pay someone to do that for you. Now, all these people, all the state people, like all the community services, have now had to become participants in the National Disability Insurance Scheme to be actually able to work because they've got no funding, yeah? So You actually have to be a participant and be accepted as a client, and then use their nominated providers. If you don't get into the disability insurance scheme, you have no avenue for support. There is nothing. They've taken the money completely out of the state system. So if you don't get into the NDIS, you've got nothing to back up on. No funding at all. And I actually took the company to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. It took me 3 years to fight this case, and the second application I did, they actually uploaded the wrong information, and at the end of the 2-year battle, when the final hearing at the tribunal, they said, "Well, I'm sorry, our hands are tied because our jurisdiction is limited to the NDIS Act, and this is an administrative error." Sorry, can't help you. Ba-boom. And this third time, I'm now 12 months into it, and I finally started jumping up and down and creating complaints. And now they're telling me that they haven't received my information, which is ridiculous because I've been through this before, and I had 4 different people send it on my behalf as well. They're just
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, wow.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is what, you know, again, what you just proved here is you can resonate with somebody like Mangioni, who's going to say that the whole point is that somebody, if somebody there is making millions of dollars and is living a lavish lifestyle off of the misery of other people, and that their way of making that money and affording that lifestyle is by denying, deposing, declining,
in any way, shape, or form, delay it,
delaying it. I mean, that is something that is absolutely
and now
evil.
What they've done,
and
because it's coming up to the 12 months, the records and everything that I submitted initially are now going to be out of date.
All right, and this is and that's what they do. You're under the delay, right? They just keep delaying and delaying and delaying, and then eventually they're hoping you're going to get frustrated, and walk away, or maybe you get well in a different way, or you heal. Well, no, you won't. But I'm saying, like, in their mind, this is what they do to people to say, "Hey, we don't have to pay for your treatment." For maybe you, or what they'll do is they'll force you to figure out other ways to pay for it.
Yeah,
GoFundMe's. This, the other.
They go, "Oh, you can use this company, but you have to pay."
But they're going to force you into doing that, and that's the point. So that's why I say this guy, jury nullification will absolutely be something that is I think more available to him than many people might think, because I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be like, "Wow, this
Can you explain that whole concept, the jury nullification?
Jury nullification is literally so
mistrial, or they can't get a diverse.
No, well, and listen, the state of New Hampshire now recognizes jury nullification as an actual jury instruction. They're actually, if a defense attorney requests it, every jury is allowed to be instructed on it. And one of the greatest cases and examples of jury nullification was the case of Jack Kevorkian. Jack Kevorkian helped people who were ill, sick, had diagnoses with terminal illnesses, to, instead of having to suffer through this, they said, "Okay, we will allow you to make the decision with a licensed doctor to have a more to basically end your life in a way that's not going to involve you suffering, much like you would for your animal." So the idea is that, listen, many people, many jurors, prosecutors especially, do everything they can to go back to that jury room and say, "Listen, you've got to follow the law, right? You got to follow the law. And if the law has been broken, you've got to go back and you've got to do this. It's part of your job. It's what you've got to do with, for your citizenry. You'd be letting this country down, or your fellow citizens down, if you go back to that jury room and you don't follow the law explicitly as it's written." However, what a lot of people don't understand And what many prosecutors and maybe some defense attorneys are really afraid of, although it's more for the prosecutors or the prosecution side that this affects, because jury nullification doesn't affect the defense really at all. But what they would be afraid of is saying, although it could, but is saying, you know what, I don't care about whether this person's guilty or not. We decide the law. So if we don't like, so jury nullification in the
So yeah,
past has been
what does it
used to
mean though?
say,
Like, what? I don't understand the terminology of it. Like,
well,
what is?
it's jury nullification is essentially where the jury says we don't like this law. So, for instance, let's just take marijuana. There was a case up in New Hampshire where marijuana. This guy was a Rastafarian, and he said they had laws that said you can't possess marijuana. So his defense was that for religious purposes, he grew marijuana. He smoked marijuana. He did it in the privacy of his own home. He didn't affect anybody. He didn't break the law. He wasn't out doing any of these things. And the reality is that state had not evolved yet to recognize marijuana as having religious or medicinal purpose or even being legal. So the defense in that case argued to the jury. Some judges will not even let a defense do that. But now in the state of New Hampshire, you are allowed to argue to the jury. You are allowed to ask for an instruction to the jury and let the jury know. If you not only are you allowed to consider this case in the lens of is there a reasonable doubt, but if you don't like the law, if you think this person should have been charged, if you think there's a reason outside of there being a reasonable doubt that this person should be acquitted, you can do that. You have the power to do that.
So
You
the
as a
jury
jury have the power in the United States, the unique power as 12 citizens to determine what the law is as it applies in this case. So you get to decide. If you think it's a bad law and you think this should have never been prosecuted, you can make a statement about that by acquitting this person. You can send the greatest message to your state legislator or the federal government by saying we are rejecting this. And
So
even though the state found him guilty, even though it's overwhelming evidence in this case, we don't care. We're finding him not guilty and we're letting him walk out of the courtroom.
is that normally
And
included in jury instructions?
no, not at
No,
all.
I didn't think so.
In fact, most of the time the judges will try to give a counter instruction to say, like, if you start to get into that, they'll shut it down right away and say, no, you know, that's not allowed. Like, you need to consider the evidence. You as a jury need to consider the evidence. You as a jury are obligated to view this case under the lens of whether or not, if you believe the state proved their case, you must find them guilty. I mean, that's what they say.
So that's something that would have to be then included into the instructions in this case.
Well, this is where I said I did my little thing a few weeks ago on the Mangioni case, and I was saying that these cases and that case law on that particular case that was, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but that case law that was in support of that case up in New Hampshire, where it has now become codified by the New Hampshire legislature, that they have codified it saying that if a defense attorney requests for that instruction, a judge is required to give it. It's not at the discretion of the judge. It can be given in any case and should be given in any case. That the jury should be aware of that power. And it's now the judge has some discretion on the arguing of it, but it's like if the defense attorney wants to argue that, they should be able to, because the jury is the one who is the trier of fact. The jury is the one who gets to decide what they're going to do with this case. And then, of course, the impacts of that and what comes out of it can be considered then for the greater whole of society that it's affecting. But that is now recognized. So in this case, we might see where this extends jury nullification, and the right to have that jury nullification instruction will be something that will be argued in this case at the state level and federal level if they decide to go forward with
that. Apparently there is a woman in Polk County that's been charged with threatening a health insurance company by repeating the words deny, delay, depose.
Well, and that would be probably because they were on the bullets of Mangioni, right?
Yeah. But she's accused.
I disagree with the OJ case being jury nullification. I don't think it was at all. that's something that grew out of the documentary that ESPN did, where they said it was jury nullification for the Rodney King case, but it was farthest from that. If you watch that case and get into the issues, and if you go back and listen to the jury interviews coming out of the trial, right after the trial, and you read the books that the jurors wrote on it, they will tell you this was not jury nullification. This was a situation where the handling that case was solely on DNA evidence. But what happened is you have to remember this was an early DNA case, and my dad was actually called because my dad handled one of the early DNA cases, and he consulted with the defense team on that because he had dealt with Cellmark Diagnostics, which was a lab that handled all the DNA testing in the OJ case, and then they also did PCR testing, which Kerry Mullis was a developer of. And the issue with that case was garbage in, garbage out. Barry Scheck, everybody focuses on Johnny Cochran's closing argument, but it was Barry Scheck's closing argument that was the one that resonated most with the jury. And it was the idea that you have all of this DNA evidence that's allegedly so overwhelming. But the problem is that DNA evidence, and in any DNA evidence, as I've said, you walk into a room that's filled with blood. It's a room filled with blood. A crime scene tech has to go in and take samples from each of those pieces of blood to figure out what is what. In the OJ case, the thing that fell on deaf ears that was underreported was all of the blood samples in the OJ case, and this was leaked to the defense team in September of 1994, and it never. And a reporter by the name of Stephen Singular reported on this, but it was leaked to a woman named Janine
memory.
to Janine Coleman, and Janine Coleman leaked it to the defense. And what she basically told the defense is the refrigerators in the crime scene trucks were broken. So when they were collecting all this evidence and putting the spindles and the swabs and everything in these trash bags, they put them in the car and they sat in the hot sun over 100 degrees. The problem is when they went in, they said, you need to look at the, well, that's the problem. When they looked at the samples that made it to Cellmark and made it to the state crime lab, there was not degradation in those samples. And then when you had the testimony of the vial of blood missing, okay, and there was missing blood, which Colin Yamauchi said he spilled some of it, but then there was also, remember, that vial of blood, and this was more important than the fireman or anything else. That vial of blood, for the first time in Detective Van Adder's, at that time, over 30-year career as a lead detective, that vial of blood disappeared for 26 hours. And it was checked out by Van Adder, and then it was returned 26 hours later. And then that vial of blood had less blood than what was in it. And there was also evidence of blood splashed on the outside, which they tried to say was Colin Yamauchi spilling that when it came into the lab. When the jury heard this, and then they went and they attacked the bindles, and they said, okay, they went and looked at the bindles, and there was evidence. These bindles should have been, the little pieces of cotton swab that would have had the evidence put on should have been dried, right? So there should be no, and then when they're put in the bindles after they're dried, there should be no blood on either side of that bindle. On the bindles of the blood samples of OJ's blood found at the crime scene, there was dried blood found on the bindles, which indicated somebody had gone after the fact, after Andrea Mazzola had initialed those bindles, that somebody had put something else in there that was wet, which means the problem is that means that those were tampered with. Yep. That's what Henry Lee meant when he said something is wrong. That's what Barry Scheck got up and said, something is wrong. There's something wrong with this case. And the thing that was wrong with this case, what people don't realize is everybody focused on, they were planting evidence. No, what they did is they fucked up the biggest case that they had, because what they did is they let all of these crime scene samples sit in a car and become unusable. And they believe that those drops were OJ's, and they had a cut on his finger. So what they did is they reinforced the case, because they didn't want to have to admit that they couldn't make a case against OJ, because all of the DNA evidence was corrupted, and was not corrupted in the sense of planted at the scene or anything like that, but it was It was degraded by mishandling. So this was a case to where we don't know. And then you go into having the problems of the timeline, the timeline issues that the state created by trying to say this happened at 10:15, and you have Robert Hystra who's hearing a voice at 10:42. You have the inability to explain how OJ goes to his home and he's covered in blood allegedly. He's got a white interior of his house, and they show pictures of this. And remember, the jury sees all this, and they focused on all the pictures that they switched up, but the real focus was on the white carpeting that OJ would have went in, and only 3 drops of blood end up on the ground in front of that door, and there's nothing else. So the question is, how did he get into the house? How does he end up getting out of the clothes? How does he go touch? They don't find any blood in the traps. They don't find blood on the doors, on the light switches, which is a problem. And so when the jury got this case, they said, okay, we take out all the DNA evidence. The glove, one of the things that goes underreported about the glove, where we say Mark Furman may have planted the glove, and people say, no, there's no way that would have happened. Well, here's the problem. That glove, which they put before the jury, it says that glove was wet when it was found, which they put an expert on the stand who said there's no way, if that had sat out behind OJ's house for the amount of time it would have sat out, that should have been wet. It should have dried under the weather conditions in June. It was wet. And across the way, there was a blue bag found. If you go back and listen to cross-examination of Lee Bailey, there was a blue bag, which Janine Coleman told them and said, there's a blue evidence bag, and there's a stick that looks similar to the wooding of the fence that was Nicole's neighbor. Both of those were logged in the evidence. Both of those came up missing later and were never able to be examined, but they were collected and they were logged. And it was this that got in front of the jury that never got reported. All they focused on was, there's all this race stuff. There's all these things. So OJ was the benefactor of fantastic attorneys who dug into his case and found all of this. And these guys didn't get away with some of the things they tried to do to cover up their own incompetencies. So this wasn't frame OJ. This was, we just may have blown, and that's what Janine Coleman told the defense team. They believe they may have just blown
covering their own asses.
Covering their own asses. And then on top of that, you have Furman, who probably planted the glove because he wanted to insert himself in the case because he got tossed off the case. And he was upset about that. So he did what he did with the glove there. And then, of course, the problem with the glove is why was there blood coming up the driveway into the house, but then there's a glove that's behind the house? So what is OJ doing? Is he running up to the fence, running back out to the car? Why is there blood going all these different directions? So when the jury was faced with that, they didn't have a jury nullification on their hand. They looked at the case and they said, reasonable doubt, absolutely. We can't trust the blood evidence. The glove, we can't trust that. We have a cop who basically states on these tapes, in the excerpt that they had, was that he would tear up somebody's driver's license to charge a black man that he saw with a white woman. End of case. I mean, so there was no jury nullification. This was not about Rodney King. This was not some activist black jury in downtown LA saying we're going to do this.
Rodney King, wasn't he a promoter?
No, that's Don King. Rodney King was a guy who was out and about, and he led the police on a police chase. And at that time in our country, all across the country, it was well known that if you led the police on a chase, they were going to exert their own style of justice, and they were going to basically beat the hell out of you. And that's what they did. And it got videotaped, and it was a group of white police officers beating up a black man. And what happens is the jury, a white jury, downtown LA, acquits these officers, even though they said, hey, there was this overwhelming video evidence of what these guys were doing. So then they took them to federal court for civil rights violations, and some of the officers got acquitted, still there, but there was a couple who threw the main blows who got convicted, but it was not a satisfactory ending in the case. So the belief was this documentary that comes out, which is actually a very good documentary in a way.
I've not actually seen the case or the documentary.
But this documentary on OJ comes out, and the premise of it was that this jury, upset about And they went, and what they did is the jurors never offered this as a way. They were asked, did that affect that? And some of them said, well, yeah, it could have been. I mean, we were more, but what they were really saying is we were more apt to believe the defense's claims because of the Rodney King case, because we knew that LA was corrupt, and we knew that there were things. And then after the fact, the Rampart scandal happens, where they had a whole gang division that was out planting evidence, and these guys were bad. Daryl Gates, who was the head of the LAPD, there was a long-standing history of the LAPD doing these things. Remember, the Furman tapes, if you dig into those absolutely atrocious tapes, the things he was talking about in there, he absolutely did. And they were horrendous. And so it showed you that these were the people that were out investigating this case. These were the people that were not going to allow a case of the magnitude of O.J. Simpson to derail their careers because they jacked it up and messed it up and were incompetent and couldn't rise to the task of investigating this case. So, yeah, they took some things into their own hands, but it wasn't because, hey, we're going to set out. Like the argument always was like, why would they ruin it? Well, they were doing it so they didn't ruin their careers because they had messed up the investigation so bad and the evidence so bad, they were forced to do it, and they had to do it.
Sounds like anyway. Phelps, Richard.
Yeah.
So is it overwhelming opinion that he was
that's
guilty?
Correct, UDF. I think there's a lot of people that don't think he's factually innocent. Correct? They think he was, but the not guilty verdict. My belief has always been the not guilty verdict. I have no idea what happened, and the reason why is there's a lot of problems with it. I definitely do not believe that what the state said happened. The timeline is problematic, and he had to have had help. So, and we know he had to have had help because I believe it was suspicious. One of the most suspicious things he did that I think tells you it is he left that house without the alarm on, which OJ never did. That was in Cato Kalin's testimony. And he called Cato about, I think it was about 15 minutes down the road. And he said, oh, Cato, I forgot that. And remember, there was another car that was seen in the driveway parked. So I believe that and Alan Parks said that Bronco wasn't there when he pulled out. He would have seen it. So my belief is that OJ was that he was involved in whatever this was. I believe that there was a second person there. I believe it's somewhere in the realm of what he said, and if I did it, and I believe the Bronco was parked around the corner. I believe he came back into the house and came back around from the outside from the pool, and that's why he was seen walking back up. But again, I don't think it's ever going to be proven what happened or not, and he's dead now, and it's going to go down to the grave. But I think the verdict itself was a correct verdict. I think that the story surrounding it, instead of sitting here saying this had to do with race relations in the United States, while yes, the world was divided along those lines, this case was just plain and simple incompetence of the police and their inability to admit that, and their inability to go and deal with that. And they went and they did look at things. There was there are people surrounding it. You got the guy Bill Waz who was allegedly hired by Robert Kardashian to stalk Nicole, and they found his notebook, and he stole Paulo Barbieri's Bronco, and they caught him in it. Look, there's things that are going on out there that were going on around this situation. Nicole was involved in drugs. She was a problem for OJ. She was a problem for his circle. She was allegedly running up debts in his name. And I think that all came back to haunt her. And I think that someone in their realm, in their way, in their place, came into town, and they went over there to settle this thing. And Ronald Goldman shows up, and we heard Hytra say, hey, 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 and something went down. I think OJ ran off. Remember, there was sets of prints running back and running forward. I think OJ runs off. There was multiple potential footprints there that Henry Lee found. And I think that's why you see the Bruno Magli's come back in, because he goes back and checks it out and says, oh my God, Jesus Christ. And I think that he left the glove there. He left the hats there. I think everything was left there. And I think some things were done, again, to reinforce the crime scene for personal things like Furman planting the glove because he just wanted to be involved in the case and make sure he was going to be involved in this case. And then I think you've also got down to where things were done to cover up incompetence, and the case never got solved. But
How old is this
OJ couldn't
case?
have done it alone. No way in the world.
How old is it?
The OJ case?
Mm,
Oh my God. It's we're going on what 31 years, I think.
shit.
04, 14, 30. Yeah, 31 years ago it happened. This year it'll be 30 years for the verdict. Um,
Have you
and
covered it?
what's that?
Have you covered the case on your channel?
Well, no, because it's an older case, so it's
Mm.
one that I want to try to cover, and I had created um, in um, the Justice Watch live channel where I was going to start trying to cover some older cases and stuff. But of course, it was a 9.5 month trial. So in order to cover
Ooh,
it, it's the
Jesus.
one of it will take an absolute effort to try to cover that trial in its
Mm.
entirety.
Might have to be done
Um,
with AI a bit.
well, I think that would be interesting to be able to
Mm,
let things get dug into with that, but I think it's
mm.
something that is just it's a project.
'Cause I've never watched it.
Yeah, well, it's like I said,
So it's 5 days a week for 9 months.
yeah, and you're gonna get every bit of it, but it's definitely one I would it's one of my goals. It's just a
Mm,
matter of balancing that with watching current trials, and literally it would
yeah.
shut everything down
Yep.
for about 9 months to do it. But it's one that I started actually airing it. If you go back to if you go on the Justice Watch Live channel, which is my subsidiary channel, it's got like 400 subscribers.
Mm,
I actually started it. I put on, I think it was opening statements on for OJ and, um, you know, on both. And it's like I said, it's a really interesting case because it truly is something that I think a lot of people have blinders on because
mhm.
they were relying on the news media to frame what they learned from it. And I
Yep.
think people will see that if they rewatch that trial and dig in, and there's a great book by Lawrence Schiller called American Tragedy, and it was written about his defense. And if you read that book, they get
What
into
was
a
it called?
lot of issues in it. It's called American Tragedy. I've read it like 3 times and listened to it like twice. And it's fantastic, and it gets into the case and does a heck of a job breaking down all the defense strategy in the case, and it talks about um, a lot of the different issues that were surrounding the case and the defense issues that were raised within the case,
Mhm,
because like I said, um, there's things with the blood and there's things with the blood evidence that a lot of people just were unaware of in the way this evidence was handled. And one of them is the concentration of DNA on these things that actually on some of these samples that coincides that the defense was able to remap together that
mhm,
Colin Yamauchi spilled a blood vial of O.J. Simpson's blood, and the concentration of DNA found on some of these samples matches the order that he touches these samples, which he admits he never cleaned or changed his gloves. So the concentration of DNA goes down as
mhm,
he's touching these samples. This
mhm,
comes out in the testimony of Colin Yamauchi. But of course, this is days and days. I mean, the defense deposed these witnesses on the stand, and I mean, they just dug into them. And some of these took 6 or 7 or 8 days, and people were obviously not sitting there watching day after day after day. Now I was because I was like 12, so I was like going in there watching, and I had like
nerd.
a VCR, and I was just watching this case because I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Talking about my dad, and it was cool to be able to see the criminal justice system at work.
Yep.
And I remember I thought he was going to be found not guilty, and of course I was right, and I was so elated when it happened because I said this is an easy not guilty. This is an easy based
At
on everything.
12.
If you really understand the case and you
Mm,
understand the prosecution's case and you look at this whole thing in its entirety, the only verdict that jury should return is not guilty because a case like that to
mhm.
stand with all the things that happened in it and all the different various stuff, it was that's what should happen. Um, because there was a lot of problems with it, and then when you
And
take
yet
away the
it still happens today.
oh well, it's listen.
Like,
The problem until we
mm,
address the issues to where we have to start looking at criminal, and again that's part of why I started my channel. Justice is a process, right? It is not the outcome. Until we
mhm,
focus on that and we focus that this is not about winning or losing. And we understand that the prosecutor's role is not to win the case.
No.
The prosecution's
To
role
present
is
a
to present
non-biased
the best
factual evidence.
non-biased case. And if they encounter a case that they're looking at the evidence and they say this doesn't meet this isn't, you're not to go before the jury and figure out how to argue it in a way that convicts the person. You should dismiss the case or send it back or send it down and say, we're going to dismiss the case, but we're going to allow investigators to investigate it a bit more. And
that's why I thought raising the bar at the indictment, like grand jury indictment phase, might wither out some of this.
Well, yes, it would, except for the fact that, again, that's all interpretable, Jody. So it really doesn't matter. It's interpreted by a judge. It's all about making sure that what you really need, it falls in line with the prosecutor that's sitting in that office. And the question is, what is the prosecutor's job? As long as we as a society hold out that a prosecutor's job is to win cases, then we will not be better off as a whole. Because the prosecutor's job is not to win the case. The prosecutor's job is to ensure that a case that fully meets the guidelines and vetting, and to ask all these questions beforehand. Preparing the case is not figuring out how do we win or how do we overcome this weakness. If there's a weakness that exists, it's okay. This is disturbing, and we need to be transparent about it, and we need to consider, are we ready to go to trial right now? And if it's not ready to go to trial, dismiss the case.
Yes.
And send it back down.
Well,
don't resolve it with a plea bargain. Don't go and resolve this with a plea bargain, because that means the police get away with this. That means send it back down and make the police do their job and make them go back and reinvestigate the case. But
so
when you
why
resolve,
don't they have to meet that same bar?
What's
why
that?
Why don't they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt at the indictment phase? Why is it such a low
Well,
bar?
because at that time that would be a little bit of that's for a jury to decide, number one. But to charge the person, it's going to be a lower finding, because they're still in a fact-finding mission. They're still going to be having to go to court and make sure that a probable cause exists, because, again, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, it's an impossible standard to meet at that moment. I mean, in the sense that, some of the evidence might still be coming. Well, it's like this. It's like if you have a presumptive test, right? And you have to wait until you have the actual DNA test, which could take 6 to 8 weeks. You have a dangerous person on the street. You don't want them off. So the standard must be lower, because you don't have necessarily the ability to go beyond a reasonable doubt at that moment, because you only have the ability to get a presumptive test. But
what about something in the middle?
But now, Jody, it also comes with the idea that if the prosecutor finds out that the presumptive test presumed it was blood and presumed it was this person's, and then they go do further DNA testing and say, well, nah, the DNA testing didn't bear that out, you don't cover that up. You don't go back and say, get me another sample or send it to another lab. You trust that the prosecutor will send that over to the defense and say, listen, we have this problem, and it looks like the DNA evidence is backing up, and that they will fairly assess the case and say, but the problem is when you have prosecutors who are focused only on winning, and they're not focused on making sure that the case is the best case to be prosecuted at this moment.
Has the grand jury ever said no?
What's that?
Has the grand jury ever said no?
Oh, of course, all the time. They absolutely have. But it's well, I shouldn't say all the time, but yes, they have. But it's, as my dad used to say, you can indict a ham sandwich because you don't have a lawyer in there, and they can pretty much represent the prosecution. Well, and hearsay is suspended. So the prosecution, normally a lot of times it's like they allow secondhand hearsay to come in. In other words, to where, or maybe it's first person hearsay, but it's basically where the investigating officer is allowed to go in and tell the grand jury what people told him and what he expects a witness to testify. And as long as they're honest and they're not lying or saying something that's factually known to be factually inaccurate in order to get the indictment, then they will. Then it's allowed. And that was the issue. That was the issue that was at hand in the Ty Tucker case. That's why the motion to dismiss was up, because what they were saying was, and this is why they say In order to ensure honesty, they have said that if a prosecutor or a witness who is relying on secondhand hearsay comes in and lies to the grand jury and knowingly lies, and they know it's a lie, then that is a due process violation, okay, that
Mm-hmm.
is punishable to the state by full dismissal of the charges. They lose their right to prosecute the case because they've held that you cannot prosecute against a dishonest witness or a known dishonest witness. And in that case, they hid Todd O'Quinn. In Ty's case, they hid Todd O'Quinn. And
Did John
they
Travis
hid the
Johnson
fact.
testify at the grand jury?
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
That's how
Pitcher was
bad
the only
then.
one that testified at the grand jury. And Pitcher failed to tell the grand jury that Todd O'Quinn had identified John Travis Johnson as the individual running out of the thing. What he presented was that John Travis Johnson had told them that he was the driver and that Ty Tucker was the other person driving out, and that had been disclosed in that interrogation. The problem with that is that no, that's not everything that was said, because if the grand jury would have known that this individual who's claiming that was pointed out in a lineup,
Yeah.
they would have had a potential, and that was what
Yep.
Ty's attorneys were saying. This needs to be represented to the grand jury. And the judge said, well, no. The argument by the state in Mansfield was, well, all right, so Todd O'Quinn, so what? We didn't disclose Todd O'Quinn. And let's just say we agree that was wrong, right? Shouldn't have done that. But the grand jury was still made aware of John Travis Johnson's testimony, which John Travis Johnson later showed up and testified to those exact same facts at trial. So or at that time it wasn't a trial, but later shows up and testifies and agrees and makes a deal and says, yeah, those facts are true. That's exactly. So they said that got before them. So what they indicted them on was that. Now, Ty's attorneys were saying, no, if this whole case goes to the grand jury and is looked at in its entirety, so John Travis Johnson, while he's swearing this to be a fact, but you've got another witness that says, no, he's the guy running out in the role of Ty Tucker that John Travis Johnson claims Ty Tucker was in, and you have him running out of the crime scene, and he's actually inside, not sitting in his car. That's a huge contradiction that a grand jury might say, you know what, we're not indicting anybody on this because there's something wrong here. But Judge Jones, this is why Ty got so mad, because he said Judge Jones basically said, you know what, I'm ignoring that aspect, and I'm just going to move it forward to trial. We're going to set a non-negotiable trial date, and we're moving to trial in January. And basically, that's where we set the stage for what happened in the case when they go to trial. But that was the big point in that, is that in the grand jury process, yes, if you lie, if you bring fake evidence in, if you bring false testimony in, it's a big offense. And that's how they tried to remedy that, by saying, okay, we're going to make it so that it is witnesses. So the state loses the right to prosecute the case if they do that. They don't get another bite at the apple. They don't get another chance. It's done. The case is over. So, all right. So
saying this will end in 6 seconds.
Actually, because it's probably going to, because I think, are you on the free? Maybe not.
No.
Okay. Okay. All right. So is this then? I think we might get 4 hours then. I think, because I think it goes up to like 4. Yes, it goes to 4. Unless you get to like the super duper.
Yeah, no.
Then you get to 8.
The first one.
Yeah. Oh, the first one, then that's 4. So we got an extension to 4. Okay. I was gonna say, if it's the freebie is 2, the first level of payment is 4, and then the next level of payment is 8, and then
no, you couldn't change any of your logos or anything on the free.
You got to go to business to get.
I'm business on StreamYard.
Gotcha. With StreamYard's unlimited, I think, even like once you get to, I mean, it's just they don't have as much graphically to, like, you can't change to they don't really have the OBS built into StreamYard like they do here. That's how EV Muffs works. But so that's where we're at on this. I know we've kind of strayed off of the topic, but essentially this is a situation to where, again, reverting back to the topic of dual sovereigns, this is going to be I think a big issue in this case that's going to be raised because of the fact that you've got the feds and the state going at it
Well,
at
it
the
could
same time.
potentially affect every case.
Oh yeah, well no, yeah, and
Yeah.
that's why this will be such a big deal,
Yeah.
because depending on what his attorneys do with this, if there's a ruling, this could be the case that with all the public settlement and push, that the public might actually stomach and ask the right questions and put the pressure to say, wait
Change
a
the law.
minute, what are we doing here? Because in the past, it was always these criminals with guns and drugs and everything. It was not like a great public relations situation where it was like the defendant was not always like a favorable individual in terms of what they were, how they were being looked at in the public eye. Whereas now we've got a little bit of a different situation with this because people are so invested in this guy's case that we might actually have the public ability to say, you know what, we need to have this questioned. Like, is this really the route we want to go here?
This is right up your alley, Udef, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because I like to see cases where the right to of a prosecutor just to do whatever they want is, and in this case, I think it's really terrible because they're, you know, running all over this, you know, the ability for the federal government to come in and levy a death penalty case against somebody and make them fight twice and put the death penalty case behind the state case is absolutely
Udef's comment. He's definitely have enjoyed hearing your guys' views on these important topics. Please keep this show going.
Oh, we will.
That's awesome feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yuda.
And we're not sponsored by Powerade. I'm just drinking it. But Powerade, well, if you watch, just saying. Yeah, well, that was the whole point behind this. The concept of this podcast was to try and deal with, the topics at hand and the important stuff.
That's right.
Even if they are difficult, they're still reality. I was having this conversation on trial the other day. It was a death penalty trial in Florida with Mark Wilson, and he had unalived two brothers, 12 and 14. And during the trial, they actually showed all the crime scene photos with the bodies and everything there. And whilst I put up the graphic content warning, I'm like, well, you know what? This is reality, mate. This is what it is. And you don't live in a bubble. You know, this is what the jury is seeing, and this is life.
Yep.
So you can either choose to watch it, turn away, up to you.
Yep.
But it is what it is. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's like I said, it's a situation where, I mean, you know, so the reality of these cases, and that's why to me the most important thing I think to and again, that's the whole premise behind this, and this is something my dad was very in agreement with, and he would encourage people to go down and watch court, and then when he started to discover that there were abilities to do this and watch the criminal justice system, it excited him greatly because to him, he always used to say, I mean, it's important. The press reporting things, seeing this. Transparency is the way. And like when people learned about what was really going on in these courtrooms and the way these prosecutors acted. But the first concept is you've got to understand, though, what the right way is. And that's part of the problem, too, is a lot of people don't understand what the right way is and why that's important and why it's also not about, you know, in these cases and in this time, it's not about guilt or innocence when you get to court. It's about proof. It's about, does the state possess the evidence to prove? And that's hard for people to understand because they're like, oh, this is about justice for well, it is to a degree, but justice to that victim is like, do you want an injustice of the state setting precedent to use evidence in an incorrect way in the name of your loved one. No.
Yep.
So it's important we get this right. It's important we hold accountability at every level when somebody isn't doing it right.
100%.
And it's not always. It's very difficult. It takes a lot of fortitude from people to be willing to stand up and say, especially if a case is controversial, especially if the facts of a case are not friendly, to say, hey, you know what? Even in light of all that, we believe that this case should be thrown out and tossed back to the prosecutor and attorneys because this case is not a good case. And you know,
it relies on human emotion and honesty, really, at the end of the day, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So, well, I guess we've been going for over 2 hours, Jody. So I guess probably now's a good time to wrap it up. We've kind of taken this topic, so if you guys give us some feedback in the comments, because I think what we can also start doing, Jody, is if we get some comments, we need to monitor the comments and maybe do a little portion of at the beginning of each show to address any questions, concerns, or any feedback we get from the viewership. And if you guys have something, a topic or something you want to suggest it in the comments.
Maybe we should create like a Discord page for all that stuff.
Yeah, that would probably
like
be good.
A dedicated.
Yes. I honestly do not have any experience with Discord, Jody.
No,
so
I'm struggling with it too, but
I don't know the first thing about it. I remember people have told me and asked me for one, and I go on and it looks like a foreign.
I know, but
so I don't like to get involved with things that I don't understand because I feel like if you don't understand it, you're going to click something one day, and then you're going to be like Shannon Sharp, and you're going to have something out in the media that you don't want.
No. I'm still working it out.
Next thing you know,
based on threads, I think. So you put in, you have your what's called a server, and you have all the things in there, so you can have a list of, and you can have it set. So as soon as it's put on YouTube, it goes into your Discord as current cases being shown, and then you have a chat attached to that. Then you have a documentation link to that as well, like a thread to that, so you can pull up any of the documents and put them there. And it's a good place to go after a stream, and all of your I put mine behind a membership wall, so they can pay. Once they pay their membership, they get the link to the Discord channel, and they can go in and we can all talk and discuss.
And it's the membership wall on YouTube. Is that okay? Yeah. So your Discord doesn't have a membership.
I think you can, but
you just put the link to the Discord behind the membership wall.
Yes.
And then basically that follows into the Discord. So then you make sure you're not getting some trolls and people that have a bad intention. They at least have to pay a little fee to be there.
You need someone to really moderate it for you.
That's it. That's the other thing that always concerns me is it's like I don't want to have something out there too that gets completely off the chain, and it's I tried to go on like Twitch and all these other ones, and it was like too much. I even tried to. I was doing Rumble for a little while, and I just kind of said, I'm a one focus guy. I'm going to focus on YouTube because I don't want to. There's too much liability when you get
Twitter,
when you get responsible for these different social media places, and somebody goes in there and starts making threats or something, you don't realize it. Now you're as the host. So I like what you're doing with it because you're adding an element of self-regulation because you're making somebody vet themselves by subscribing and then joining a membership on your YouTube channel, and then you get the gateway into the
elements
Discord.
that you can put in place to prevent.
And then I assume you also approve everyone on there, correct?
Yeah.
Like when they come in before they get access. Is that how that works?
You allocate a certain amount of people to help moderate. So if they're in there on your behalf,
so just like in the mods in the YouTube channel, you can have good people over there that have done you well on YouTube and say, create the community.
But you can have
with the mods as
all sorts of stuff.
Creating your community.
It's a good place when you're not online to
Right.
go and chat with your subs as well. Like, you know.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And and especially with all the cases that are going on out here, it's a great place to
Some
talk and maybe
debriefings.
even
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep. Yep.
and just continue the
But have
conversation.
some fun stuff too. You know, you can have categories of your pets and, you know, you can have
Sure.
movie nights together. It's amazing what you can do. Like verdict watch. Let's go over to Discord and play a game of
Oh, I
trivia or
got you.
something, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
Instead of
got you. Can you play videos in Discord too? Like,
apparently you can do anything. I'm just gonna work out how to do it.
yeah, like I said, it's just,
I
I don't
found a
want.
guy that's gonna help me
I
set
don't like
up.
to do. I don't like to get too involved on this stuff without knowing what the hell I'm
Yeah.
doing. And I have. I have. I mean, I've been told multiple times on
Yeah.
my
It's
previous
the way to
time when I
go,
was in
apparently.
there on my other YouTube channel. I have.
Mm,
I was. People were asking for Discord channel. And
yep.
I'm like,
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know about it. But
I had
I
someone
suppose it's
set it
something I
up for
need
me.
to evolve to because I guess it's going to go. It's going to help further build the community.
I don't
So,
like Twitter because it's too political, too aggressive, too.
Twitter, I'm not a fan of for
No,
various reasons. I have Twitter over there,
so do I. But I
but
just post
I
my
just more or
stuff and
less
go.
put it up there because there is some interesting stuff. Like during the Young Thug trial, there was good. There was like any stuff they would be putting clips up over there before they would go anywhere else.
Yes, if you want
There's sometimes
instant
good information about
stuff.
the Karen Reed
Oh,
trial and everything.
yes,
Yeah,
I agree.
yeah.
If you want to know what's
So
happening right now, why is this trial late? Oh, let's get onto Twitter.
yeah.
But yeah.
So all
All
right,
right.
well, I think
Keep
we're
your
gonna.
we still haven't worked out there's a couple of ideas that we've got. That's why we were late in the planning phase. Keep your
Yep,
notifications set on
absolutely.
because we might be dropping an extra podcast here or there. All right.
Yeah, absolutely, for certain. And make sure you've got them turned on.
Oh yeah.
Although for me, I'll be honest with you, I do so many. Make sure you have Jody's turned on because I will tell you this, Jody. Well, here's the thing. I don't know if some of you out there who come across this video and you wonder because I get reports all the time. I'm not getting your notifications. Well, YouTube will only notify you 3 times in a day. And so for me, when I'm
You use
running
it with
3
your trial.
trials,
Yeah. Okay.
I knock that out at probably
Yeah.
1 in the morning because I'm got crap going up all the time. So that's why you might only get notified about 3 things going on. You go on my page and you're like, holy cow, there's testimony this, testimony that. Blah, blah, blah. So, if we were to put up a notification or Jody puts up a live for this, you might not get the notification because if I've already done 3, it'll sit.
Yeah.
And then the next day, it's never going to pick it up. It's just going to be sitting there until we go live, which normally I try not to post anything in the middle of the night on these days so that it will actually
I chuck
pop
it
up.
in the link into my community page like every second day.
Well, my community page is
I don't
so
know.
busy with stuff that it gets
Get lost.
it gets lost because I'm putting up
Yeah.
things about every video I'm doing with the different trials we're covering and different summaries and things. So, it's a pretty busy place. But yes, go to Jody's page and make sure she'll, check in with her to see what's going on because we'll always go up both places. So you'll be able to see what we're doing.
Absolutely.
So, and if you're a subscriber of mine and you're not subscribed to hers, go get subscribed to hers. That's a good
I need
excuse.
300 more
That's
before the end
right.
of February.
Yep. Yes.
I do.
So
Actually,
we gotta knock
the
that
challenge
out.
is on.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm up for it.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up. So
Thank you very much for that,
let's see if we
Steve.
can nail the ending here.
Yes.
I
Stay
don't know.
tuned.
Where's that? Where's the outro here? I don't know.
Oh, I've got it. I'll get it.
Oh, you got it? Okay. I'm gonna let you do it. The one time it turned into a total disaster.
Yeah, but I made a good short out of it.
Yes. Make sure you never get all these unexpected shots behind the scenes.
All right. Stay safe. Stay well.
Yes.
And see you next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
And let justice prevail.
Yeah. Bye.